Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take the material you've shared with us and really unpack it together. We try to dig in and pull out the most valuable insights.
Yeah, it's all about getting you informed, quickly but deeply, cutting through the noise.
Exactly. And today, we're diving into something pretty specific, but really relevant for a lot of businesses. Modernizing the software they already have.
Right.
We're looking at this concept called offshore brownfield software development. So we'll explore what that actually means, look at the costs, the risks, the potential value.
And based on the material, how you might even think about calculating the return on investment, the ROI, for projects like these.
Right. Our goal here is just to help you understand what's really key about this approach using the stuff you brought to us.
Okay, let's get started.
All right, so let's unpack this. Before we even get to the offshore part, let's get clear on this core idea. Brownfield development. In software terms, what are we actually talking about?
Well, think of it like this. Brownfield development means you're working with something that's already built.
Okay.
It's the process of modifying, upgrading, maybe adding new features, but to existing software systems. You're not starting from a blank slate.
Right, because the opposite is greenfield, yeah, like
Right.
building on an empty plot of land.
Exactly. Greenfield is starting fresh. Brownfield is more like, renovating a house that's already there, maybe adding an extension.
You're building on what already exists, leveraging those previous investments and frameworks.
Precisely. The main goal really is to enhance or modernize systems you already rely on without having to, throw them out completely, extend their life, boost their capabilities.
Okay, so improving, not replacing, makes sense. What are the sort of defining characteristics of this approach that come through in the material?
Well, a really big one is the need to integrate with legacy systems.
Legacy systems. That term always makes me think complexity, maybe some headaches.
Yeah, it often does. And usually for good reason. These are often the systems that have been running the business for years, maybe decades. They hold critical data, key processes.
So whatever new stuff you build has to work with the old stuff.
Absolutely. It has to play nicely with that existing, sometimes quite old infrastructure. Compatibility isn't just nice to have, it's fundamental. You mess that up, you could face massive disruption.
Right, so you need to understand the old and the new and how they'll sort of handshake.
Exactly that. Another key thing mentioned is code reusability.
Okay, using what you've already got.
Yeah. By reusing existing code, maybe modules or components that are already part of your system and proven, you can often cut down development time and costs quite a bit.
And presumably that code's already been tested in the real world.
That's the idea. So it can improve reliability compared to writing everything brand new from scratch. You're kind of standing on the shoulders of earlier work.
Hopefully solid shoulders.
Let's hope so. And the third characteristic that's really important, especially in certain industries, is regulatory compliance.
Okay, like finance,
Oh.
healthcare, telecom, places with lots of rules.
Absolutely. If you're modernizing systems in those regulated sectors, you have to make sure the updated system still meets all the standards. Think GDPR, IPA, things like that.
You can't just add a cool feature if it breaks a compliance rule.
No way. So brownfield work is really deeply tied into existing systems, existing code, and existing rules.
That definitely sounds challenging.
Oh, it absolutely can be. The material doesn't shy away from that. It talks about the significant technical complexity. You're often dealing with code bases that might be old, maybe not well documented.
Or written in languages hardly anyone uses anymore.
Sometimes, yeah. And you might even need to do some reverse engineering just to figure out how a part of the system works so you can integrate properly.
Like software archaeology.
Kind of. It really highlights why things like detailed documentation and really, really thorough testing aren't just, best practices in brownfield. They're absolutely essential.
Okay, that definitely sets the stage for brownfield itself. Now let's bring in that offshore element. The material talks about outsourcing this kind of work to offshore IT agencies.
Yeah.
What does adding that layer do?
Well, it brings several potential advantages into play. A big one is getting access to specialized skills, particularly for those tricky legacy code bases we just talked about.
Right, because finding a local expert in, say, COBOL or some really old ERP system,
Yeah,
that could be tough and probably expensive.
exactly. Offshore agencies often have, a deeper pool of developers who are proficient in those niche or older technologies.
Okay.
But crucially, they often also have the expertise in integrating those older systems with modern frameworks, APIs that can kind of bridge that gap between the old and the new.
So they know the old tech and the new tech needed to connect it all up.
That's the idea. Other advantages mentioned are things like, well, bringing a fresh perspective to an old system, maybe minimizing disruption to your day-to-day business because the offshore team is solely focused on that project.
Dedicated focus.
Yeah, and helping tackle that buildup of technical debt over time and maybe easing the transition towards more modern system architectures down the line.
Okay, so leveraging outside specialists for this complex modernization task. That leads us straight to the question of value, of ROI. How does the material frame calculating return on investment for these offshore brownfield projects?
It suggests it's not just a simple cost versus revenue thing. You really have to look at a mix of financial, technical, and operational factors.
Because you're not just building something new to sell, you're improving an asset you already rely on.
Exactly. You need to weigh the short-term costs of the project against the longer-term benefits you get from enhancing that existing system.
What kind of long-term benefits are we talking about?
Things like measurable improvements in how the system performs, maybe making slow processes faster, reducing downtime because you're stabilizing fragile parts of the old system.
Let's breaking down.
Right. And importantly, extending the useful life of that system, pushing back, or maybe even avoiding the huge cost of a complete replacement.
So the ROI is really about efficiency gains, reducing risk, keeping the asset going longer, plus any new features, of course.
Exactly. It's a more sort of holistic view of ROI.
Okay, so if we drill down into the specific benefits the material points to for choosing the offshore route for this brownfield work, what are the really compelling reasons it gives?
Cost efficiency comes up very strongly. That's often a major driver.
Lower labor costs overseas, right?
That's a big part of it, yes. But the material also points out that because it's brownfield, you're leveraging existing systems. You need less new infrastructure, maybe fewer big software licenses, compared to starting greenfield.
Oh, okay.
So you combine those lower labor costs with needing less new stuff. And the material suggests this optimizes your resource allocation, leads to potentially higher ROI.
So it's that combination. Offshore savings plus brownfield reuse.
That seems to be a key argument. Then there's that access to specialized skills we mentioned. The material really emphasizes that offshore partners often keep expertise in those niche or older technologies. It mentions things like COBOL, VB6, specific legacy ERP skills that might be hard to find or keep in-house.
Making it actually possible to work with that ancient core system instead of just hoping it disappears?
Pretty much. And again, they often also have the modern skills needed to integrate everything properly.
Got it. Beyond skills and cost, any other big benefits highlighted?
Scalability and flexibility are mentioned. Using an offshore team lets businesses scale their development power up or down more easily as the project needs change.
Without the headache of hiring and firing permanent staff.
Right. Less long-term overhead. That flexibility can be really valuable for project-based work like modernization efforts.
Makes sense.
And finally, faster time to market is presented as a potential benefit, while reusing code in brownfield naturally speeds things up a bit. Having offshore teams potentially working across different time zones can allow for almost continuous development, sort of a follow-the-sun model.
The work gets handed
Yeah,
us.
which could lead to shorter development cycles, getting those improvements out the door faster, and starting to see that ROI sooner.
Okay, so potentially big upsides. Cost savings, specialized skills for tough legacy tech, scalability, maybe even speed. But, as we said, brownfield is complex, and offshore adds things like communication challenges. How does the material suggest managing the risks?
It points out that experienced offshore partners should come with built-in ways to mitigate risk. For instance, their expertise in legacy systems means they're better placed to navigate those complex architectures and hopefully avoid really costly integration mistakes.
So their experience itself reduces risk.
That's the argument. Another strategy mentioned is doing things incrementally, phased rollouts.
Okay, not a big bang approach.
Right. You modernize, test, and validate parts of the system in stages. This lowers the risk compared to one massive update, and if something does go wrong, the impact is hopefully smaller.
Update a piece, check it works, move on. Sensible.
Seems so. The material also stresses that trustworthy partners prioritize things like regulatory compliance and data security. They understand the need to align the modernization work with standards like GDPR or HIPAA, which is obviously critical, especially when dealing with sensitive data in older systems.
So the complexity is real, but a good partner should have ways to handle it. What about the challenges that are maybe amplified by the offshore aspect?
Well, legacy system complexity is still a challenge, obviously, and it can be amplified when the team working on it is geographically distant, maybe further from the actual hardware or any physical documentation that might exist.
Adds another layer of difficulty on top of the technical one.
Exactly. And communication barriers are just, well, inherent when you're working across different time zones and maybe cultures. It really demands strong communication tools, very clear processes, and solid project management to keep everyone aligned.
Those daily stand-up calls need careful timing.
Huh, absolutely. And quality assurance risks are also noted. Making sure the new code and the old systems work together perfectly needs really rigorous testing. Managing that effectively when teams might be distributed is crucial.
So clear processes,
Yeah,
excellent communication, they're not just nice to haves, they're fundamental.
seems that way. Which really underscores the importance the material places on choosing the right partner. What does it say about how to select a reliable, experienced remote IT agency?
It really emphasizes looking at their track record and specific expertise. The material actually uses WeblineIndia as an example of the kind of partner it's discussing.
Okay, and what specifics does it mention about them?
Well, it highlights claims of having over 25 years of experience, specifically in this brownfield development area, with established methods. It notes their stated expertise in legacy modernization across different industries, mentioning healthcare, finance, manufacturing, retail.
So, suggesting they've dealt with diverse legacy systems in different contexts?
That seems to be the implication, yeah. The material also points to their remote teams being skilled in both older technologies. It names COBOL and Delphi as examples, and the modern frameworks needed for integration.
Covering both sides of the equation, the old and the new.
Exactly. And it also mentions their stated pricing models being transparent and focused on ROI, which ties back neatly to our earlier discussion about calculating value.
Okay. So the material uses this company as a sort of case study illustrating the key attributes. Long experience, diverse legacy knowledge, the right mix of old and new tech skills, and a focus on delivering value.
That's how it's presented, yes. The source provides contact points, like their website, WeblineIndia.com, and email, info@WeblineIndia.com, for those interested in learning more or using their project discovery tools.
Got it.
So, pulling this all together, offshore brownfield development, based on the material we've reviewed, is really presented as a strategic option, a potentially very effective way for businesses to tackle the modernization of their crucial legacy systems.
Yeah, it's framed as this balance, balancing the cost savings from offshore talent and reusing existing assets while managing the inherent risks through partner expertise and structured approaches, all aiming to create long-term value.
Improving performance, reducing risk, extending the life of core systems.
Right. It's about making targeted investments in the foundation you already have, instead of always facing that huge, daunting prospect of a full rebuild.
Makes a lot of sense. So, thinking about all this, here's a final thought, maybe something provocative for you listening to consider. What is the fact that there are so many incredibly old, complex legacy systems still running critical parts of industries like healthcare and finance? What does that tell us? Not just about past tech decisions, but maybe about how fundamentally hard and expensive it is to actually change core business processes, even when the tech is clearly outdated. And given how much the material stresses trust and deep experience when picking an offshore partner for this kind of work, what criteria, beyond just the technical skills, should be absolutely non-negotiable when you're deciding who to trust with modernizing your most vital systems?
Those are definitely questions worth pondering.
Absolutely. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into offshore brownfield software development based on the material you shared. Thanks for bringing these sources to us.
Yeah, we hope this conversation helped shed some light on the key aspects and the complexities involved.
If you found this deep dive valuable, please do share it with colleagues or friends who might also find it useful. And remember to subscribe to the deep dive wherever you get your audio so you don't miss our future explorations.